Dear friends and colleagues, thank you for joining us today. I would like to introduce to you Mоханад Хейг Али, who's a well-known specialist on on Levant, first of all, and I had several opportunities to listen to his brilliant presentations about Hezbollah, about the situation in Lebanon and in Syria, about the situation in domestic policy in Lebanon. So we had some lengthy conversations with him about it. So he's a very really brilliant and a very interesting speaker, and I hope you will all enjoy his today's presentation. Well, Mоханад, if it's possible, and just in advance, if it's possible, it would be very good if you could elaborate in your presentation about the current ties between Lebanon and Syria, because most of researchers here in Moscow are concentrated on Syria, on all kinds of events that are happening there, but really not that many people understand what is the interconnection between Lebanon and Syria, and not everybody understands the scale of dependence, of mutual dependence of these two countries, and the role of Lebanon for Syria as well. But we will be also very interested to hear your vision of the current situation in Lebanon, because we are very much concerned, and in our previous assessments of the situation in the region, we were always expressing concern about potential destabilization in Lebanon in the near future. So please share us some of your insights.
Thank you, Nikolai, for the generous introduction, and hello everyone. Hello, Irene and Arina. It's really good to see you again after years since our Italy meeting last time. I would just start with a quick introduction of how we got here in terms of the Lebanese crises. I mean, we've seen two drastic changes. One, economically, since 2017 onwards, since what we call here in Lebanon the Hariri moment, when the MBS administration decided to kidnap the Lebanese Prime Minister, Saad Hariri, and force him to resign in November 2017. This resignation triggered a financial reaction. There was a huge capital outflight. So there was a huge capital flight from Lebanon abroad. The banking sector, which is the most important sector here in Lebanon, saw a huge demand on US dollars. So many were trying to switch their deposits from from Lebanese pounds to US dollars, given the crises. So that kind of accelerated an inevitable process, which is basically what we now know here in Lebanon as the banking Ponzi scheme. The banking sector taking deposits from Lebanese expats, from Arab investors, giving them high interest rates, and then giving the money to the Lebanese government, lending the Lebanese government to finance their public expenditures, which were rising for no reason, specifically when it comes to government employees, a kind of a bloated sector here in Lebanon. The government has more than 1/3 of the employment in the country, which is a huge chunk. And so the regional met the local. Locally, the model was not sustainable, but at the same time, it could have lasted for longer. But regionally, there was a rising hawkish position when it comes to fighting Iran. MBS and also the Trump administration's maximum pressure campaign on Iran, leading many to lose confidence in Lebanon's banking sector, given Hezbollah's position in Lebanon. and the rising U.S. sanctions against Hezbollah and the banking sector here. The U.S. basically bankrupted a couple of Lebanese banks, the Lebanese Canadian Bank for its links to Hezbollah a while ago. And then there was the Jamal Trust Bank, which was placed under sanctions. This also dealt a huge blow to the Lebanese banking sector. So what was seen as a model that could last for long, you know, public lending, high interest rates, etc. This was the crash was accelerated by the hawkish U.S.-Saudi position in the country, and in return also, the rising role of Hezbollah using Lebanon as a station for Iran's regional ambitions. Since the 2012 engagement in Syria, there has also been an engagement in Egypt, an engagement in Yemen, using Lebanon as a station. We've seen, for instance, I'll give you a small example. We have a nice hotel here. It used to be the Marriott. It's called now the Golden Tulip. Just behind it, there's a small alleyway, which we call the Iranian Fleet Street, because it has about 4 or 5 TV stations for the Iraqi Hezbollah, TV stations also for the Bahraini opposition. You have a TV station for the Chalabi Mu'tamar, Hizb al-Mu'tamar al-Watani, the Iraqi Congress party, which was pro-American, and then it turned to be a pro-Iranian outfit. And also we have the TV channel of the Houthis, Al-Masira, which has a base also in Lebanon, which, this kind of exemplifies what we see as a rising Iranian use of Lebanon as a satellite for other influences across the region. So this, coupled by the Saudi US hawkish policies and the lack of consideration for Lebanon's composition, the Lebanon's constitutional system, in which all sects kind of participate within the system. Although Hezbollah has an arsenal, it has weapons, it has still to share power given the country's setup. So, this is generally speaking about the situation here. But going back to your question, Nikolai, I mean, the link to Syria is important. I mean, since 2017, as the Russian engagement in Syria bore fruit in terms of switching the conflict from a losing conflict into a winning one a couple of years later, the Hezbollah started speaking about 2 important policies that should be implemented. And this was pushed further by their victory in the 2018 elections. The Hezbollah and their allies won basically the majority of seats in parliament for the first time since 2005. So 13 years on, this was the first time they took the parliament. So they spoke about 2 policies. One, having a closer relationship between Lebanon on one hand and Syria and Iraq on the other, Syria, Iraq, and Iran on the other. And 2, kind of stopping the Lebanese-American military relationship, the military cooperation between both countries, and pushing for, first, the first they pushed into a cooperation agreement with Russia. They put some pressure on that. And then later on, as a relationship between Russia and Iran and Syria turned out not to be all that glamorous, given the incidents which happened there. Specifically, the border, the Qusayr Russian military police versus Hezbollah standoff, which happened later then, we saw a decrease in Hezbollah's statements about demanding a stronger relationship with Russia militarily. They switched to a stronger relationship between Lebanon on one hand and China and Iran on the other. So a more focused speech on the importance of a relationship with China and Iran's capability in arming the Lebanese military, etc. So what we've seen is, given the U.S. pressure, we've seen a trend which goes against Hezbollah's wishes when it comes to a stronger relationship with Syria. Since January, of course, given the Lebanese dollar crisis, we've seen a huge appreciation of the depreciation of the Syrian lira since January onwards. And it was actually faster depreciation than the Lebanese lira. However, this was switched, and there were some accusations that Hezbollah was smuggling US dollars into the Syrian market to help Syria basically face the US dollar shortages and decrease the exchange rate, kind of stabilize it. And it happened. I think they've succeeded in doing that. I don't know if it was due to the buying of US dollars here, but a trend which we were seeing walking in parallel, we saw walking in reverse. You know, the Syrian lira US dollar exchange rate was stabilizing while the exchange here was soaring. And so this was attributed to Hezbollah's smuggling of US dollars from Lebanon to the Syrian market. And speaking of Hezbollah's grand plan to have a very strong and tight relationship between Lebanon and the Syrian regime, the reverse happened, after the Caesar Act came into place. The discussion, rather than having a stronger relationship with Syria, the discussion switched to how we can limit the damage of the Caesar Act by withdrawing of some of our agreements with the Syrian regime. So there was a reversal in policy on the official level, although Hezbollah kept its rhetoric about, having a tighter relationship with Syria and the impact this has on the Lebanese economy. The reality is that we have an agreement to buy electricity from Syria, and this is going to stop at some point. As the Lebanese government now is seeking alternatives. As you can see, there is no electricity. I'm using my mobile phone to get to get some internet. There's no electricity in Lebanon, only a couple of hours a day. So I think this is going to stop. We won't see any electricity from Syria in the next phase unless the US gives us a waiver, which is unlikely at the moment. So we will see less and less business on the official level. And also, in reality, the IMF is also requesting tighter controls on border areas. This means less smuggling. So the unofficial, the informal exchanges between the two countries are also under attack. Under the pretext of, the country needs the tariff system to be in place, needs to support local industries, and that these informal crossings and informal smuggling is basically having an impact on a negative impact on the Lebanese economy. So we're seeing a reverse trend in the relationship with Syria on the official level. And there's a push towards that, keeping a lifeline to Lebanon, not a total collapse, but at the same time, the country needs the IMF deal, and so there's lots of leverage for the US and its allies in terms of shaping policy here in Lebanon's regional goals, regional place in the regional setup.
Okay. Thank you, Mоханад.
Thank
But
you.
did I interrupt you?
No, no, please go ahead. I
Yes.
stopped there. I thought allowing more, give
Yes.
and take questions is what we're going to focus on.
You actually gave us something to think about, because it sounds like now Hezbollah is the dominating political force in the country. Well, judging by your presentation, is it correct? So because I always, for example, personally, always viewed Lebanon as a country which has a very delicate balance between different sectarian groups, between different parties. But what is happening now? Is this situation changing? Will there be a hegemon on the domestically? I mean, and will it be Hezbollah then? What do you think about it?
Look, I see, the delicacy is still there, and there's a nuance in understanding Lebanese politics, which I think to a large extent, many of the US officials and Saudi officials don't really understand or don't really appreciate. The current trend is, while Hezbollah won the 2018 elections, they couldn't do anything with it. Okay, they haven't had the majority since 2005 in Parliament after the Syrian withdrawal from Lebanon, and after winning an election in 2018, they found the country going down in a downward stream and not being able to achieve any of the goals that they've set in Nasrallah's speeches. For instance, the stronger relationship with Syria, etc. Although in government now, Hezbollah and its allies have the majority to implement any strategy, we are seeing two trends that are countering that. One, as I said earlier, the pressure, the external pressure in terms of sanctions, in terms of the Caesar Law, Caesar Act, and the impact that these sanctions have on the Lebanese government and the way it approaches politics. They can't have a stronger relationship with Syria, for instance. They're trying to go to China, but at the same time, I haven't seen any clear strategy there. They're seeking Gulf help to lift Lebanon up from the current quagmire it's in. The second trend, I think, is also significant to look at, which is that the US is pressuring Hezbollah's allies. Hezbollah rules by coalition. The Lebanese Shia are only, have a small share in government. In population, they're 1/3, but in terms of their share in government, they have about 20%. So this is a small share in government and in parliament. They can't do much with 20%. So they need to have a coalition, and that coalition has rules. I mean, the base of Hezbollah, Lebanese Shias who are in the gray area and used to support Hezbollah for what they've achieved in terms of resistance and pushing the Israelis away from South Lebanon. Now they're asking questions. What kind of price has Hezbollah agreed to pay in return for support for its weapons and resistance within the Lebanese system? Has the price been that Hezbollah has turned a blind eye and actually protected some of the corruption which was eating out the Lebanese government's budget and increasing our public debt, leading to the current crises? The answer is usually yes, because Hezbollah, although they've promised to fight corruption, they haven't done much in terms of doing that, in terms of implementing that promise given by Hassan Nasrallah before the 2018 elections. And I think the first signs of the US pressure on Hezbollah's allies were the FPM basically making statements signaling that they're willing to shift their position. On one hand, Hezbollah is pushed by a protest movement, cornered into into a position in which they're seen as protectors of corruption, and thus they have to crack down on what the movements such as the Free Patriotic Movement, which is the Aoun, the presidential party, into basically changing their policies in governance. For instance, they voted against a proposal by FPM on having a plant which has, on establishing a power plant which has no place at all in our energy strategy. Just it turned out that the Sarata power plant was to be built on a land owned by an FPM MP and his family. And that will give them about $200 million, according to some estimates. So Hezbollah voted against that, and then suddenly FPM switched sides and started saying, the weapons of resistance are the cause of our suffering here in Lebanon, and started making really big statements, which seemed like they wanted to shift their position. And then Hezbollah itself shifted its position on the Sarata power plant and went back to where it should be. Basically next to FPM, supporting whatever they want to do. So in generally speaking, I think there are limits. Hezbollah also is discovering the big limitations on its power. There was a moment of greatness for the organization in 2018, and they thought they can do much in Lebanon and change politics forever. And I think now they understand the limitations of that power and actually the dangers of having such a power in their coalition. And also, generally speaking, I mean, as the country is suffering economically, we're seeing a threat to the country's security as well. On one hand, many of the protests are turning into kind of riots in certain cases. And we're seeing there's a breaking point in which, the salary of a Lebanese commander and the internal security forces is, let's say, 3 million lira, which is $2,000 according to the old exchange rate. Now the 3 million lira are nearly $400. So we've seen a total depreciation of the value of the salary. And I think there's a breaking point, because the danger of doing the job at a certain point will cross with the security forces' lack of willingness to sacrifice for the job, given the depreciation of the money that they're receiving. So I think that breaking point means, and I think we're approaching that very soon, perhaps by the fall, means we will have less and less security in the country. And the trend is self-security. The old parties that I, as a kid growing up in civil war Beirut, so taking over the streets, are now playing an increasing role in providing, sometimes they're providing security, but in many cases they're providing services in the areas they control. And that has to do with the sectarian system. Each sect controls its own region. So Hezbollah is not dominant in non-Shia areas. They're dominant in Shia areas. They might be stronger in areas which are mixed, but these are very limited to places like Saida, for instance. And in Christian areas, we're seeing, the former Christian militias, specifically the Lebanese forces, are showing up sometimes with weapons, sometimes without weapons, saying that we want to protect Christian areas from an invasion by Muslims. And, the Druze are doing the same. The language of the Popular Army, which was the Druze militia established during the Civil War, is now being used again, deployed again. That, the mountain region, Jabal, basically is now a protectorate by the Progressive Socialist Party. The government is still there, but you can feel some changes. You can feel that they are taking over some of the tasks which were previously done by the government. It's happening slowly, but I see us reaching there, perhaps at some point in the fall, if the deterioration continues, which is most likely. So in a nutshell, I don't think Hezbollah controls everything, as some of the American experts are saying. It's not really the reality of things. They've discovered how limited their power is. And when push comes to shove, I think each sect will protect its own, and Hezbollah will have to be limited to the sectarian nodes of sectarian influence areas.
But what do you think? Is there any light in the end of the tunnel? Because is there any hope to overcome this crisis, or we will see only the deterioration of the situation in the next 6 months? Or what, is there any, at least, are there any reasons for optimism, or no hope at all?
Look, I mean, in terms of if there's a solution, of course, the Lebanese government is seeking an external package, bailout, which is not going to happen. One, given the coronavirus crisis in the region. I mean, one of our officials went to Kuwait to ask for help, and Kuwait is basically witnessing a crisis and a cash crisis. I mean, they have little cash money. They've invested a lot. Their sovereign fund has invested a lot in abroad. But they've incurred some losses given the COVID-19 situation, and they have little cash to share with the Lebanese government. So, the attempts to get external help are failing, and I think there are also some political reasons behind that. There's a political motivation not to provide Lebanon with any help. On one hand, Europe cannot extend a hand of support unless there are a series of reforms done in the country. And they see the IMF deal and the IMF requirements as a gateway to provide more help to Lebanon within the framework of reforming the system. And these reforms, as I said earlier, for instance, the Salata power plant, the electricity sector reform is being blocked, for corruption reasons. And I just don't see that changing. I mean, in 2017, we had this conference, the Center conference, to support Lebanon. And they asked for some reforms which were much less than the ones required now, and none were implemented. And the Center donors didn't pay anything. We didn't receive any single penny from abroad. And the reason was that, and it still stands, that the political class, political elite does not want to change. They just can't change the system. Because I think there's an existential threat that they face if they change the economic system. The private sector is not controlled by a series of monopolies. If they can't really milk the system to support the rentier system that they have in place, this means their political power will be challenged. And they don't want that. This is something that's not really on their plates at the moment. So they prefer to wait for some bailout, some package, some hero that comes in from the door and decides to bail us out. And I just don't see that happening externally. Neither politically it's possible, given the maximum pressure campaign, etc. And now, just to note, for Hezbollah, for them, it's a waiting game. We have to wait until the US presidential elections. As if, if Biden wins the presidential elections in November, everything will change. Lebanon's problems will be resolved on that specific day. And I just don't buy that, given one, that Biden won't take over until the end of January, and things won't change in Lebanon until then. We might see a quicker deterioration in the economic situation here. So I just don't think the external solution will help. Internally, in terms of reforms, I think there is a solution, but as I said, it's an existential threat. Most of our debt is internal. You know, the deposits that were given, that were placed in Lebanese banks, these are the ones which kind of funded the Lebanese public debt. 30%, you know, we have $30 billion, which are basically the Euro bonds, 29 point something billion dollars. And the Euro bonds are partially owned by Lebanese banks. So yes, I think, you know, this is a solution. The solution is internal. We need a bail-in. We need to have a haircut for big depositors. And then there needs to be a reform, a change in terms of policy. But I just don't see that happening. I don't see them willing to do that. And, you know, to go back a little bit in time, last year, just before the Lebanese protest movement started in October 17, in July and in June and in May, you know, all Lebanese officials were speaking about the upcoming crisis. They're saying, you know, we will, the country will collapse, the economy will collapse, it's going to be doom and gloom. They were warning each other so that the other side would give some concessions and not them. So even internally, they didn't want any concessions between them. And I remember this tale from you know, the Sultan Abdul Hamid, the Turkish Sultan, who had a number of his aides just getting drunk all day doing nothing, and they didn't want to shower or do anything, and then he decided to order them to be thrown into a mass grave. And then he gave them a last chance. He said, you know, are you going to change, or shall I just, you know, throw the sand in? And they told him, throw the sand in, throw the sand in. We're not going to change. And I think we're facing the same, we're facing the same trouble here with this political class. They don't want to change. They're not willing. They're willing to look at us, you know, die from hunger, get self-destructed, and you know, and they don't want to change anything. They're willing to do some cosmetic changes, but the reality is this is not enough.
Well, this sounds like a dead end, but now I would like to start with a Q&A session. Colleagues, guests, are there any questions to our distinguished speaker? Alex, please. Alex, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Yes, now okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mohammed. Just one question. To go on with the previous question already put by the moderator. Dear Mohammed, how would you estimate the situation within the Christian community in Lebanon? When we talk about the proportion of supporters for Al-Mustaqbal Hariri party and pro-Aoun forces within the Christian communities, are there numbers the Lebanon Christians supporting Aoun, or this community is already exhausted? The greatest part of it has left the country and so on. What's the proportion among the within this community for Aoun and for Mustaqbal, not against Aoun, but for Mustaqbal? Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Al-Mustaqbal is Hariri's party, and you know, they usually have little kind of support within the Christian community. But the FBM, the Aoun party, which was the major political power among Christians, as you said, is basically in power now and is blamed for most of the crisis. I mean, I remember in October 17 onwards, the biggest slogan was curse your mother, Gibran Bassil, who's the son-in-law of Michel Aoun. So they were cursing cursing this, the leader of the Free Patriotic Movement, who's the son-in-law of Michel Aoun, because he is to blame for the energy crisis, and he is to blame for he dominated the energy ministry for more than a decade, and so the failure that we're seeing now in the electricity sector is being pinned on him. So I think the level of support that they've had previously in the Christian population has decreased drastically, and I think the Christians are exhausted, as you said. I have no numbers to say, but I've heard one of the polls people saying that if we do a poll now, most probably it will be in the 25% support among Christians, which is basically the core base of FPM. Those have benefited from FPM and are big followers. I think the level of support for the Lebanese forces has increased. So the Christian Lebanese forces, which was the second party after FPM in terms of support among Christians, the level of support for them has increased, and also Sami Jmail, the head of the Phalange Christian party, is a pro-protest movement figure, and he has participated actively in the protests. So I see that his popularity has increased, but to what extent, I'm not sure. Having said that, I think there's an existential issue here at stake. I mean, on one hand, this financial crisis will push many thousands of Christians away from the country. I mean, we're already seeing thousands of Christians leaving since the airport was open. Many are going to Canada, many are going to the United States and Europe. They have relatives abroad, much more than Muslims do, and I can see them suffering more than the remaining communities in terms of the decrease in their numbers. The demographics are not totally on their side, given the birth rates and all, but still their proportion was I think among the biggest in the region. And so having a Christian community which wielded some political power in Lebanon and kept Lebanon away from the rest of the Muslim world in terms of its conservative leanings. I mean, Lebanon was more of a liberal state in the region, I think, due to the Christian presence. This will be impacted big time. This is the biggest fear, that the country's composition might change due to this current crisis. And given also the rise of Islamists, because in Sunni areas where Hariri was very popular, Hariri is now weak, and many are pointing fingers to Turkey as being the next big player in Lebanon, given the absence of Saudi Arabia and the disinterest of Saudi Arabia. And Turkey's friends are Islamists, mostly conservative people who want to change Lebanon in a direction which is not really great for Christians. So I think the current crisis is putting in place trends which will lead to drive away Christians from Lebanon and change the country's composition, making it more of a Muslim country than it was in the past.
Excuse me, may I ask you a question? Well, Mоханад, thanks a lot for having accepted our invitation. It's a great honor for us to have you here. Well, and it's a pleasure to see you again for me. I would like to ask you a question concerning Hezbollah and its role as a quasi-army of Lebanon. Because several months ago, I had the chance of coming to the northern frontier of Israel, just the frontier with Lebanon, where Hezbollah is playing a role of a professional army, as the Israelis used to put it. They say it's a fast-learning enemy, and we are now dealing with professional army. But speaking not about Israel, but about Lebanon. So what is more important now for the country? Are people perceiving Hezbollah, first and foremost, as a provider of security, as a defense force, as a resistance force, as you said, or they are probably also afraid of a provocative role, which it can play on the border. And you know, there are a lot of incidents. So what is the balance between the two? Thank you.
Thank you, Irina. It's an honor for me also to be speaking to you. I hope at a later stage we can have more, we can connect even more, given how fast changing the situation is. Regarding Hezbollah being a professional army and how the Lebanese population views it, I mean, Hezbollah has shared power with different communities. So they have, I think, a minority among the Sunnis who view Hezbollah as a resistance force against the Israelis and against the United States. And I also think now there used to be more of a split among Christians, half-half, in terms of how they view Hezbollah. And I think now there's a minority of Christians, a sizable minority, but a minority nonetheless, who views Hezbollah as a resistance movement, which is necessary to protect the country against an Israeli invasion, if and when it happens. And as a deterrence force, of course, keeping the Israelis at bay and protecting Lebanon from Israeli threats. But I think among the Shia community, the majority of Shias, and these are the border regions with Israel, the majority of Shia, the vast majority of Shia, still see Hezbollah as a necessary force to deter them from an Israeli aggression. And specifically after Trump signed all of these declarations of giving Israel away, giving Israel an acknowledgement of their occupation and acknowledging the annexation of lands in Syria and next in Palestine. So the view of the Shia is basically that without Hezbollah, we would have been on a piece of paper signed by Trump right now. Hezbollah's resistance pushed the Israelis away in 2000 and kept them at bay in 2006, and will prevent any future occupation of the country and later annexation by an expansive state, expansionist state. So this is the view in the Shia population. Having said that, I think there's a growing sense that Hezbollah is a burden in Lebanon, generally speaking, across the communities, with the exception of the Shia community, where I think now there's a change of mind. There's a minority which thinks that Hezbollah has to concede somewhere. Specifically when it comes to its regional role, not to its role in defending Lebanon against Israeli aggression. And I think the feeling is shared across the communities that this regional adventurism, in which Hezbollah played a role in training Houthis in Yemen and playing a role in Iraq, and also in fighting in Syria, that this role that Hezbollah played has impacted Lebanon's relationship with the Arab world, and definitely decreased the chance that we can get any help from the Arab states when we need it the most. And so I think this has impacted the image of Hezbollah as a resistance movement. But I don't see why the party would, I just don't see why the party would change its engagement abroad. I mean, they have lesser of an engagement in Syria now, but I just don't see why they would shift their policy now and seem so weak and desperate. Although I personally see that they will face some protests in the Shia community at some stage, given the deteriorating economic conditions. I was in the south a few days ago, and I heard many people complaining about not Hezbollah only, about Amal, about the situation, about basically all the speeches that make no sense anymore, because they're asking people to go and grow plants, grow seeds, and distributing seeds for people to grow on their balconies and to grow food on their balconies. And some people see an insult in that you destroyed my economy, and now you're telling me I have to grow food on my balcony to eat. I mean, what kind of policymaker are you? How are you protecting me?
Anastasia, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your brilliant speech. And it was really, really interesting, especially about Hezbollah. And could you please comment an Iranian role in the current process? I guess it will be really interesting.
Yeah, thank you, Anastasia. I mean, the Iranian role is basically supporting Hezbollah and Hezbollah's position in Lebanon per se. But also the Iranian role is saying that we are willing to give Lebanon electricity. We're willing to build the Lebanese electricity grid. And we're willing to sell Lebanon oil and for Lebanese pounds and not US dollars. So, but the question is, how much Lebanese pounds are you going to take? Is it going to be market rate US dollar exchange rate? And, what does that differ from any other deal? And also, what will be the impact of Lebanon's buying oil from Iran? I mean, the Iranian officials are saying, we're willing to transform your army, but here's Iran being bombed from the inside and no one is doing anything about it. And they're making these mega statements about transforming Lebanese economy. And, people are not really buying that, to be honest. Hezbollah is using this in its propaganda, that we can have an industry as strong as the Iranian industry, and that we can shift our economy from a rentier economy based on the banking sector and attracting deposits into an economy which is based on production, on agriculture. And the Iranians are willing to help in that. But I just don't see anyone heading in that direction, at least not yet. On the contrary, I see people looking for alternatives. And just a quick note on that, because Hezbollah's rhetoric on going east, as they've described it, is triggering a backlash in the Christian community. That Lebanon going east or going west has been the subject of a civil war in 1975. The Christians wanting to go west and the Muslims wanting east and wanting pan-Arabism and pro-Palestinian slogans. And that has led the Christian, the Maronite patriarch to make a statement saying, no, Lebanon's identity is not going to be changed. They want us to go east and have a stronger relationship with an Islamic State. No, we want a strong relationship with the West. And so Nasrallah came out saying, and that happened in the past 10 days, Nasrallah came out saying, going east does not mean giving up on our relationship with the West. We don't mind Lebanon having a strong relationship with the United States or with any other country, but going east is a prescription to some of our problems. But the patriarch has now expressed strong statements stressing the need for neutrality in Lebanon's position. So I don't see Iran capable of doing anything. What I see as interesting in the Lebanese context is how Turkey is being perceived as the protector of Sunnis, increasingly so. This is for me. I see this as the shifting ground in the Lebanese context. But
by the way,
I see for Iran.
By the way, Mоханад, but it looks like Turkey is the only player who actually has the money to bail Lebanon out, and the Turks would like to, I think they will be happy to try to drill for gas offshore. Is Turkey viewed as a potential savior of Lebanon in the current situation, or are the Lebanese politicians as doubtful about Turkey as they are about Iran? So is it the same attitude, or is there any difference? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I see them as doubtful as Iran. I mean, on one hand, you have the Armenian community here. Of course, Turkey denies any role in Lebanon. We have nothing to do with Lebanon. We're not really doing anything. We're not participating. But what Turkey has done in the past 15 years is they've invested quite a lot in the Sunni communities. They have a development program on one hand. On the other hand, they give scholarships to Lebanese citizens, specifically Sunnis who want to travel to Turkey, specifically in Tripoli as well. So they've given thousands upon thousands of scholarships for people to go and study in Turkey. And now there's a Lebanese community in Turkey, which is also impacting the way Sunnis here view politics. And also, I would add that the Lebanese Turkmen community, which has been Arabized or Lebanonized, so to speak, their Turkish identity has been revived by a direct investment by the Turkish government. And there are links that are being found between the Lebanese Turkmens and the Syrian Turkmens on the other hand. And this is an army, actually. I would call it a small army of supporters of Turkey and Erdogan, who are being mobilized on and on again whenever, let's say, the Armenian community, which is a considerable community here among Christians, whenever the Armenians try to organize to commemorate the genocide by the Ottoman Empire, we see thousands of Erdogan supporters showing up on the streets. And if you ask Armenians, they would say, this has never happened before. You know, this is the occurrence of the past 2-3 years. Because, you know, Erdogan and Turkey are being more explicit in the kind of supporters are being more explicit in their loyalty there. So we see a Turkish role emerging. In terms of their gas and their money, I think they're more willing to invest in supporting the Sunni community. And I think this will considerably impact their chances of becoming the protector of Sunnis in Lebanon. And I think they have the chance to do that, and they are in a strong position to do that in the next phase. I'm not sure whether they want to, they use that leverage that they have inside Lebanon to push for a deal in the Mediterranean. You know, I see that as a, maybe in a later stage. But what I hear from Turkish sources is that Turkey is interested in being the big player in Lebanon. Like, they want a seat on the table when things go wrong. So they want to sit down and negotiate on behalf of Sunnis and protecting Sunnis, given that the trust that they have among the Sunni communities. And they played, their cultural policy that they've invested in the past years has bore fruit. I give you an example. I'm from a generation which grew up watching Egyptian cinema in the 1980s and 90s. And for me, Egyptian stars are the Arabic stars. And so when I was walking in a mall the other day, and I saw an Egyptian star walking alone with a couple of people walking around him, trying to take a picture with him. And he was the Alain Delon of the Egyptian cinema back in the day. And a Turkish star, but when a Turkish star appeared in a mall last year, it was the opening of a mall last year, you had thousands showing up for him, attacking. Actually, some of the Lebanese ladies tried to attack him and grab him, but they ended up destroying some of the mall's glasses and some of the merchandise in the mall as they tried to reach him. And so the Lebanese army had to step inside the mall and pick him up and save him from his fans. So you can see, what Turkey has done for itself here, and I think this is a major thing. Of course, they haven't translated that yet politically. Still Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and the parliament, when it comes to the parliament and to their influence there, they have the say. But I think in the next elections, this might be totally different.
We have a question from Diana. Diana, please.
Hello. Dear Mоханад, thank you for your speech. It was really informative, and I would like to ask you a question concerning the possibility of radical Islamist movements rise in Lebanon. Is it even possible, or Hezbollah is considered as a protector from any kind of aggression outside and within the country? Could you please somehow elaborate on this topic?
Thank you, Diana. Yeah, I think we're definitely seeing some movement on the Islamic front. I mean, on one hand, you have a new generation of Islamists, but these are, the moderate Islamists, the Muslim Brotherhood types, who are demonstrating in the north and have been playing a role in the protest movement. But also we have the Al-Qaeda supporters, and many reports are emerging about an activity, increased activity by Al-Qaeda in the north, not the Islamic State, given the situation now. And although the government has recently arrested a cell working with the Islamic State, but I think Al-Qaeda is the major danger here now. Given the Harras ad-Din activism in northern Syria, and the network that used to be Hayat Tahrir Sham network in Lebanon is now mostly affiliated with Harras ad-Din, the Al-Qaeda affiliate in northern Syria, and not the Hayat Tahrir Sham. And so I think the next phase will be that of a growing influence for these. I mean, we've learned in the past that Islamists, specifically extremist Islamists, make a show in the times of turmoil, and I think this is really their time to showcase their support. But I go back to the issue of Turkey. I mean, I give you two examples of the pro-Turkey Islamists and what they've done in the past couple of months. For instance, there was a demonstration which went wrong weeks ago, and that demonstration was in which the Sunni prophet, Sunni symbol, which is the prophet's wife Aisha, was cursed by a Shia demonstrator on camera. And after that happened, there were armed clashes between Shia militiamen loyal to Amal and Hezbollah in Barbour in western Beirut, with Sunni fighters who were seen as defending the dignity of Aisha, the wife's prophet, in abstract terms. But in reality, people appreciated that in the Sunni areas of West Beirut. And the fighters were Islamists, were pro-Turkey Islamists in West Beirut. And they fought really well. And I have some contacts in that area, and they've told me that the Muslim Brotherhood, they stood up for us. And the interesting thing that they've had some Palestinian fighters joining them in the battle. So the way I imagine the next phase, if the security deteriorates and if there's no bailout and if things just head to the crash that we're seeing right now, is basically is Sunni Islamists joined by people from the refugee fighters from the refugee population and forming a force to be reckoned with perhaps in the next phase, and protecting Sunni areas from Shia aggression or other sectarian aggressions. But I see Islamists as taking over from the moderate Hariri party, which is on Mustaqbal, which is a non-Islamist, kind of a secular Sunni party. He doesn't have the arms, he doesn't have the capacity, he doesn't have the loyalty, and he doesn't have actually these, the will to engage in such actions. The Islamists do, and I think we will see a rise in Sunni Islamism militancy in the next phase if things continue to head in the negative direction. Yeah.
Thank you, Mоханад. We have one more, I think, last question from Alexei. And then I think we will wrap up. So please, Alexei.
Thank you very much, Mоханад. Thank you for being with us, for sharing your views on what is happening in the country with us. So thank you very much. We appreciate it. I have two questions. According to what you've said about China, about the involvement of them in the internal affairs or economic affairs of the country, and taking in consideration what you just said about Turkey and Hezbollah, would you say that Lebanon might become a competing ground between these regional or maybe global countries? I've just decided to check the trade balance of Lebanon, and I noticed that in imports, China is number one. It takes like 10% of all Lebanese imports. And if we take next four countries, it's Germany, Italy, Greece, and the United States. It takes together 29%. So if we just try to model a confrontation, like zero-sum game between the Chinese and the United States, we see that there is a fertile ground for that. Would you say that it is, well, you can really think in these categories, or it is it's not accurate to say that? Thank you.
Thank you, Alexei. Yes, I believe there has been there has been and there will be more competition between the regional powers in the country. I mean, look at the Turkish, soft power role in Lebanon so far, and also the myriad number of supporters in different domains, and also Iran is here. Saudi Arabia is less and less involved, but the UAE is more and more involved. The UAE is they have a strong media presence here. They have, what I see interesting is that some of the UAE supporters are also Assad supporters. So the UAE is building a kind of a coalition, which is more of a rainbow coalition from different sides. And their focus is definitely Turkey's, role, and also Iran's role in Lebanon. But what more than that, in the sense that in the next phase, given how things evolve, if there's let's say a deterioration in the security situation, I definitely see a more visible and clear Turkish role in Lebanon, and a more visible and clear UAE role in Lebanon. And definitely Iran is already here. And perhaps we'll see, we'll see other states step in. I mean, the United States is active in Lebanon, has been, but definitely Israel, given, and a question of when will this secret war impact Lebanon is always on the plate here. So, will the Israel secret strikes in Iran reach Lebanon at some stage? I think this is a big question that we have. So, I think there will be a stronger regional footprint here, definitely. And as things deteriorate, this will open more spaces for them to step in. But the authorities have been more alarmed about the Turkish role, and they've been pointing fingers at Turkish involvement here. Turkey has denied everything, but they show up. The ambassador is becoming more visible, and I see that as a sign of where things are going in the next phase. It's unfortunate, but for me and for many Lebanese, we just look at the country sinking, and the solution is there, but they don't want to do the solution because it will cost them influence. So I think the direction is where things are going, and how the situation is evolving is very unfortunate. But I just don't see light at the end of the tunnel at the moment, except if there's a bailout, which I also don't see coming from anywhere. So I definitely see a more regional power play in the next phase as things deteriorate. Yes.
Thank you, Mоханад. It was a brilliant presentation. We've learned a lot. I've made like 3 pages of notes from your speech, and I hope that it was really. I'm sure it was very interesting to all of our guests and for all of our colleagues. Thank you very much. Irina, maybe you can add something.
Just to wrap up our seminar, I would like also to thank once again Mоханад. I do believe it is not the last time you are coming to our seminars, because we are deeply impressed by your presentation, and we will be very much looking forward for your coming back. So we are always happy to host you here. All the best. And so thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, dear guests, dear colleagues, thank you for participation. And Mоханад, once again, thank you very much for your time and for your deepest insights. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much. It was really a pleasure, and I hope I'll see you all soon. Thank you for all the questions. Very interesting.
If you ever have any questions about Russian policy or anything, we will be happy to join you and to discuss them with you whenever it is convenient for you. Thank you.
Definitely.
And
thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a nice day. Have a nice day, dear guests. Bye bye.